Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Assembly Budget Subcommittee 4. If I could get a roll call, Sarah?
Assemblymember Furutani.
Here.
Assemblymember Arambula.
Here.
Assemblymember Brownlee. Assemblymember Cook.
Here.
Assemblymember Jeffries.
Thank you. We have a quorum, so we'll start our meeting. Mr. Jeffries is now here.
So we just do what we're going to do.
Folks, we have on the consent calendar several items from the Department of Justice, the Assembly, the Senate, and Department of General Services. Can I get a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Furutani,
Yes.
Arambula, Brownlee, Cook,
Aye.
Jeffries.
Consent calendar, Mr. Jeffries.
Aye.
Thank you very much. That is done and out. Members, we now go to the vote-only items, so we won't be hearing anything on these. We'll get through them pretty quickly. Item 7100, Employment Development Department, issue number 1, May revise updates, Disability Insurance Program and Benefits Adjustments. Staff recommendation to approve this proposal to update the 2010 and 11 revised estimates. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cook. Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Furutani.
Yes.
Arambula. Brownlee. Cook.
Issue number 2, Workforce Investment Act adjustments. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Jeffries.
I apologize.
I mean, I know you're used to the no's, but you at least should ask.
No, I'm sorry.
I
My
apologize. Jeffries.
I'll stay off. No. I am an I. Sorry to do that to you.
Jeffries is an aye.
Sure did not want to miss your yes vote, Mr. Jeffries. I think that makes 2. No, I'm sorry. Thank you. Issue number 2, members, the Workforce Investment Act adjustments. The recommendation is to approve. Can I get a motion, please? And I will second.
Yes.
Wait, say that again? No, it's approved.
Approved and sends to conference.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. It'll send it to conference committee, right. Roll call, please.
Furutani.
Yes.
Arambula. Brownlee. Cook.
Aye.
Jeffries.
Aye.
Okay, that makes our vote different, so it'll go to conference. Issue 7350, Department of Industrial Relations, issue number 1, federal grant augmentation to the Cal OSHA program. Recommendation to approve the proposal.
Move approval.
I will second. Roll call, please.
Furutani.
Yes.
Arambula.
Aye.
Brownlee. Cook.
No.
Jeffries.
No.
That'll hold open. Issue number 2 is a residential prevailing wage survey. Note this control language is applicable only for the term of the 2010-11 Budget Act, and any continued application would be subject to future legislative action. And as a part of the motion, we are removing the $798,000 for the general fund savings. So we're not going to spend it this year. It's going to go to general fund savings. A motion to approve.
With that understanding, I will move approval.
And I will second. Roll call, please.
Furutani.
Yes.
Arambula. Brownlee. Cook.
Aye.
And Jeffries.
I'm off on this one.
Thank you. That one is out, members. We have... Thank you, Sarah, for that help. Issue 0820, Department of Justice. Issue number 1, the Legal Services Fund swap. And it's a vote only. And the recommendation is to reject this proposal.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Arambula,
Yes.
second by Mr. Cook. Roll call, please.
Furutani,
Yes.
Arambula, Brownlee, Cook,
Aye.
Jeffries.
Aye.
Issue number 2 is the gun show program augmentation. It shifts the positions from the general fund to be funded by the dealer's record of sales account. The recommendation is to approve the budget. It's to monitor the gun shows. Motion, please.
Move staff recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Rambula. I will second. Roll call, please.
Furutani,
Yes.
Arambula, Brownlee, Cook, Jeffries.
No.
All right, that will be held open. Item 8950, California Department of Veterans Affairs, issue number 1, the Glavic Veterans Home Activation Phase 4. Recommendation is to approve the Glavic Phase 4 with the following adjustments. 1, adopt the LAO recommendation to achieve savings of $700,000 for the general fund, and 2, to eliminate the Information Officer 3 position from the request for additional general fund savings of $90,000. May I
Move
get a
approval.
motion, please?
So moved.
And a second by Mr. Cook. Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Furutani,
Yes.
Arambula, Brownlee, Cook,
Aye.
Jeffries.
Thank you. That's out. Issue number 2 is the Reading and Fresno Veteran Home Construction Completion and Pre-Activation Phase 2. The recommendation is to approve the funding for the Veterans Homes of California in Reading and Fresno, with the exception of the passenger vehicles for which the budget authority is denied, saving $184,000 general fund dollars, and the Reading Home residence transportation vehicles saving $380,000 for the general fund. This action would conform with the Senate subcommittee action. Motion, please. I will second. Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Furutani,
Yes.
Arambula, Brownlee, Cook,
Aye.
Jeffries.
That one's out. Members, we now go to issue 0690, California Emergency Management. Issue number 1 is the Domestic Violence Shelter Funding. Staff recommendation to conform with the state Senate action by modifying the restoration of $20.4 thousand, what is that?
Million.
$20.4 million by one.
Here, a million there.
I'm sorry. Modifying restoration of the 20.4 million, that's 19.1 million general fund and 1.3 million federal funds, and 2, continue the limit of the CalEMA to 5% of state operations, and 3, adopt a budget bill language to reflect this change. Can I get a motion, please?
I move we adopt the staff recommendation to conform to the Senate action.
Thank you, Mr. Rambula. Second by Mr. Cook. Roll call, please.
Furutani,
Yes.
Arambula, Brownlee, Cook,
Aye.
Jeffries.
Members, we now go to issues to be heard. Item 0860, the Board of Equalization, issue number 1, the collection cost recovery fee. Staff recommendation to is approve 1 position, the establishment of the collection cost recovery fee, and proposed trailer bill language. Real short presentation. I think this one's pretty straightforward.
Liz Hauser, Director of Admin for the Board of Equalization. This is a proposal that has been prepared by the Department of Finance. We have not received a policy direction from our board. We hope to get that tomorrow. However, based on a review of the proposal, we would be able to implement with 1 PY, as recommended by Assembly staff.
Any comments from the resource table, LAO, or Department of Finance?
Scott Sanders, Department of Finance. We note that the language that we're working with the Legislative Counsel's office does not include the continuous appropriation.
Good point. Thank you.
If I could, Ms. Chair, Liz Hauser, Board of Equalization. The board staff recommends that continuous appropriation language remain in the proposal. The reason we're asking for the continuous appropriation language is our understanding of this fee is it represents an offset to operating funds, not additional revenues. This would allow the fees to be collected in 1 year and used to offset operating expenses in the following year. we would propose that a separate fund be established that would allow for easy tracking of the fees and funds collected to ensure we do not exceed the actual amount of collection costs, as this is one of the parameters of the statute for these fees, is you can only charge up to the amount of your actual collections, and by having a separate tracking mechanism, we can make adjustments to the fee as appropriate to ensure we don't exceed that cost. And would ensure the funds are used for the intended purposes. Thank you.
What was the recommendation on that, Mark? Did you want?
And that would be
We will then include the continuous appropriation, and that'll be in the trailer bill language.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so that's the recommendation, members. Can I get a motion, please? Second.
Question.
Yes, of course.
Walk me through this. I'm having a little trouble with charging a fee for people who are paying their taxes. So to pay their taxes, they have to pay a fee. And if they pay their taxes on time, they still have to pay the fee?
No, the fee would be implemented for someone who, after 90 days or didn't enter a payment plan, the fee would be imposed for being delinquent and having us to actually expend efforts on trying to collect the funds.
So those who do pay on time won't experience this fee, and those who do not agree to a payment plan will have this. Is that correct?
Well, with the 90 days, okay. So if somebody files and pays on time, they will not get a fee.
Good.
If they file and they don't pay, and then after 90 days they don't enter into a plan or pay us in full, they would get imposed the fee.
In any other scenario, would this be considered more of a late fee than anything, or a penalty, or, I mean...
No, that this would be a different fee than being late. If you file and pay your return late, there would be a 10% filing penalty, and this would be a fee to reimburse the state their cost in collection.
So if we're still charging the 10% late fee, and now we're going to charge a fee on top of the late fee, what's the late fee for if the second fee is to penalize them for filing late?
Well, the penalty is, of course, supposed to be an incentive to file and pay on time. The collection reimbursement fee is to reimburse ourselves for the cost of collecting the fees. The taxes that after they become over 90 days. It takes more effort to collect the tax after somebody doesn't file and pay on time. You know, real people have to make calls, send levies, order liens.
The state spends approximately $27 million a year on the taxpayers who fall in this category, those who are delinquent beyond 90 days and have not entered into an agreement. So what we're trying to do is put a mechanism in place for the folks who are delinquent for that amount of time to be able to reimburse the cost of recovering that fee.
Could you restate how much?
It's approximately $27 million a year.
In recovery efforts for late paying taxpayers?
Correct. Late or non-paying.
Late or non-paying. And how much do you collect in the 10% late fee charge?
I don't have that figure with me. I could send it back.
I think we'd probably want to know that to see if we're actually going to penalize above and beyond the cost of what the late fee collects. I mean, if your costs are, say, $20 million because of the collection costs for late, and the 10% late fee is collecting $30 million, why would we bother wanting additional fees on top of the existing fees?
You're saying the late fee should be include the cost collected.
You would think when the late fee was established that not only would it be an incentive to keep taxpayers to paying on time, but it would also cover the costs of the state's collection efforts. And we are not being provided today with what those collection efforts are actually recovering by virtue of the 10% fee. So you would think you'd want that component answered before you approved an additional fee on top of the existing fee.
Well, if you agree to the continuous, I always forget.
Continuous appropriation.
That would be a different bucket than where the penalties go. So the continuous appropriations would come back to pay for the PYs that we use to collect the delinquent taxes, where the penalties is going into another bucket, the general fund.
Well, maybe we should fix that.
But
Certainly
this-
consideration.
This is consistent with FTB's model, which has interest penalties, late fees, and a collection fee to recover their collection costs, and other tax agencies who have the same sort of model, who charge a collection fee to recover their actual cost of collection.
Okay. Thank you for your answer.
Mr. Cook?
Couldn't we just threaten them to put them on the budget committee and then everybody would pay right away?
That could probably do it. Colonel Cook, that would probably do
Mr. Chairman, a question, if I may.
it. Yes, sir.
If there is an agreement that's entered into,
Retiring, so she doesn't want to come back and have to explain this ever again.
Thank you for remembering.
She wants to get out of here. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Juan.
if there is an agreement that's entered into within 90 days, that doesn't necessarily mean that the amount owed is paid in full, but there's an agreement to repay over a period of time. And if there is an agreement entered into within 90 days, would there be a fee charged?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Members, this is going to be the last shot at this one for the BOE, so the recommendation is to approve the position, one position. That position is going to be paid by these fees, and the issue of the ongoing appropriation is going to be put into the proposed trailer budget language. That's the recommendation. Can I get a motion, please? I will second. Moved and seconded. Roll call, Mark.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
No.
Jeffries?
No.
We will hold that open. Members, we have now, under CalPERS Health Reinsurance, issue number 1 is CalPERS Health Reinsurance proposes a reduction of $200 million from the general fund to reflect anticipated savings. Recommendation to approve. Okay. LAO or Department of Finance? Comment from Department of Finance?
Corinne Martone, Department of Finance. We just wanted to update the number. The most recent number we got from CalPERS is $128 million for the state.
So it'll be 128 rather than
200, correct.
Okay, since that number's going to have to change in the conference committee?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we'll take care of that. But the recommendation is to approve. Second, roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Not voting.
Jeffries?
We will hold that one open. Members, we go to control section 3.60, issue number 1, Judges Retirement System 2. Approve revision of control section 3.60 to reflect the new JRS 2 rate of 24.041%, and JRS stands for? I knew that, Les. Judges Retirement System. Any other questions? Can I get a motion on the?
Move the staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. I will second. Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
Off.
That's out of here. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to TBL, trailer budget language. Issue number 1, the Public Works Board trailer bill language. Excuse me. Staff recommendation is forward this recommendation to the Policy Committee, that's Business and Professions, and request a recommendation on how the committee should move forward. So we're just going to move this forward to the Policy Committee. There's a few more T's to be crossed and I's to be dotted to figure this one out. So if, could I get that recommendation? I'll second it. It's moved and seconded to move it to the Policy Committee for further recommendation. Roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
Aye.
Thank you. Members, we are now with the California Redistricting Commission, item 0911. The issue is a request for an augmentation of $3 million. The staff recommendation is to reject the governor's proposed augmentation and instead approve the following budget bill language and trailer bill language and supplemental reporting language, all of which is in front of you. Questions, members? Yes, of course. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Elaine Howell, California State Auditor. We actually are still in the process of carrying out Proposition 11. As is indicated in the staff analysis, my office is not asking for any additional funding. We received $500,000 out of the $3 million that was appropriated for Proposition 11. We were able to cover most of our other costs with reserve that we had in the state audit fund. I actually made some modifications to our recruiting last year, shut down recruiting essentially, didn't bring in some staff that we had intended to bring in anticipation of the need for funding for this proposition for us to be able to carry out our responsibilities. Our responsibilities will continue through the end of the calendar year. The process that we have to complete is we currently have about 4,500 individuals who have made it through the supplemental application period, have submitted their letters of recommendation. So my staff right now, the panel that was established via the Act, is in the process of assessing those 4,500 to take it down to 120 individuals who we believe are the most qualified, who reflect the diversity of the state. Those 120 individuals will be interviewed between mid-July and early September, and then that will be culled down to 60 names by October 1st. Those 60 names have to be submitted to legislative leadership by October 1st so that legislative leaders have the ability to strike up to 2 individuals from each of the 3 pools per leader. So a total of 24 individuals could be taken out of the pool of 60. The remaining names come back to my office. The legislative leadership has to submit those names back to my office by November 15th, from which I draw the first 8 individuals, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 2 from this other pool of not affiliated, either independent or declined to state, etc. And then those 8 commissioners will select the remaining 6, again, considering diversity, to make sure that that final commission of 14 members that's established is reflective of California's diversity. The commission has to be established by December 31st of this year, commence its work immediately because they have to have the maps drawn by September 15th of 2011. We have been working and have had a couple of meetings with the Secretary of State's office, and I'll let them talk about what their role will be, because there will be some transition happening later this calendar year for us to transition certain things to the Secretary of State. But for the Budget Committee's purposes, my office is not asking for additional funding at this point in time. Now, there may be a request for some funding for my office, a small amount, probably about $130,000, $140,000. The reason we would need that funding is that would be to cover the costs of the 8 commissioners as they commence business to determine who the remaining 6 individuals will be. They earn a per diem of $300 per day. Any day they conduct business, their travel expenses, etc., should be reimbursed as the initiative calls for. So as my office is continuing the selection process and providing support to those 8 commissioners, we would need funding to support the commission themselves. My staff's time will be paid for out of my budget. So if members have any specific questions for me, I'd certainly be happy to answer those.
Secretary of State's office, want to comment?
Janice Lumsden, Deputy Secretary of State for Operations. As the State Auditor mentioned, we've had meetings to talk about transition matters. Our request for SOS budget support for the help we'll be providing to the commission members hasn't changed. But in the last month, we've begun preliminary work to identify commission costs, such as their legal staff that they'll need that has election experience. We've gathered some information on the software that would be needed by the commission to do their mapping. And we've also, probably most importantly, initiated discussions with the administration about their space. So as it relates to the recommendation of the staff, we have no trouble with the supplemental report language. We would believe by September of this year we'll have detailed information to share about
members, I think we all agree the importance of having this work continue. The issue relative to the $3 million augmentation request was just that it was sort of not a blank check, but a sort of a line of credit of $3 million. We are going to be able to provide with the budget bill language up to $1 million to be used by the Director of Finance, and they can use that and put it in play anytime to cover the costs that the auditor mentioned. And as this proceeds through the rest of the year, the money will be looked at relative to what they need to use rather than just sort of give them a lump sum and then whatever happens, happens. So if you have before you, and if I understand correctly, staff has talked with everybody involved to make sure, including those that are interested in the audience and some of our good government friends that are really staying on top of this, which we appreciate. So I believe everybody understands what we're doing. We're trying to be very sensible about how we move forward and make sure we move forward, because this is a very important political process that the public has voted for. So if I could get a motion on the
Move staff recommendation.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Kia Chow, Department of Finance. We would just like to note that we understand that there have been developments since January 10th. However, we do have concerns that the staff recommendation may not provide sufficient flexibility and time for the Commission in terms of dollars and the language.
Okay, that will be duly noted. The recommendation still remains the same. It has been moved, and I will second. Roll call vote, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee?
Give Mr. Brownlee a minute.
We'll come back. Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
Aye.
We will go back. We'll come back to you. Okay. That is out. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you,
your
members.
presentation. Members, we're going to item 0950, State Treasurer's Office. Issue number 1, California Alternative Energy and Advanced Transportation Financing Authority. The recommendation is to approve the request for staffing and the LAO recommendation. If the LAO would like to speak to that.
Jason Cisney, Legislative Analyst's Office. This was a May revision proposal where the Treasurer requested 6 new positions to implement the sales and use tax exemption for green energy manufacturing that was approved early this year. It would be funded with a general fund loan. Under the proposal, be repaid no later than June 30, 2012, and would be repaid through program fees, application fees, for instance. Our recommendation, we're okay with the number of positions. We'd recommend making the loan from the Renewable Resource Trust Fund, which has a fairly healthy fund balance, instead of the general fund.
And that is the recommendation. Questions, members? Could I get a motion for that?
I would move the requested staffing along with the LAO recommendation.
Thank you. Can I get a second? Thank you, Mr. Cook. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
No.
Members, that's out. Thank you very much. You were very convincing today. Issue number 1110 and 1111, Department of Consumer Affairs. Issue number 1, the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education, the result of a bill passed last year, AB 48, by Anthony Portantino. Recommendation is a bit lengthy. Charge 5 education specialist positions, change 5 education specialist positions from limited term to permanent. Number 2, and the trailer bill language, add a requirement on the BSA audit for, what is this? The state audit, and the BPPE is?
Private post-secondary education.
Right. To look at whether they are appropriately staffed for the required work, and 3, in the budget bill language, require the 5 education specialists be located in Sacramento. That's the recommendation. Any questions, members? Thank you. May I get a second? Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Not voting.
Jeffries?
No.
Excuse me.
Somebody who wants to speak from the audience.
I'm sorry. We would gladly hear someone speak from the audience. My apologies. I'm sorry. I didn't know we had to speak.
Good afternoon. My name is Zoanne Lorente. I'm SCIU Local 1000 member, and we want to make our concerns known that we believe that the staffing plan as proposed that limits the education consultant positions to 5 only is a failed staffing plan that was tried and resulted in a number of the generalist positions being converted to education consultants, and that there are other existing successful staffing plans that could be utilized for the department to better implement and assure effective implementation of the Act and the new agency. So we'd be happy to work with staff to resolve these issues beyond just the 5 positions being relocated to Sacramento.
Appreciate that. We're going to, as a part of the recommendation, add a requirement that we really look into whether that this is an appropriate staffing level. Is sort of a work in progress. So we will continue to work with you on that. This is sort of our starting point, and we want to get this off the ground and get it going right now.
Great. Thank you, Chairman.
We will continue to talk with you about it as this unfolds.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, I apologize.
Mr. Chair, Carla Shelton, Department of Finance.
Yes.
We continue to support the governor's budget as proposed.
Is that the same as a recommendation?
No.
No. Okay, you continue. Okay, any more? This is all after the vote has taken place. Thank you, though. I apologize for not noticing that you wanted to speak. Anyway, that is out, everybody. We now move to issue number 2, which is Breeze. This is to approve to conform with the Senate. We've already voted on this. The Senate added, yes, the Breeze project. The Senate made some changes relative to some of the wording, and so this is to make it consistent.
I would move we adopt language to conform to the Senate action.
Is there any more explanation needed?
No, we concur with the Senate's rulings on that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, Ms. Brownlee. Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Cook.
Yes, BREEZE stands for...
BREEZE is the proposal that will implement an integrated licensing and enforcement system.
What does BREEZE stand for? It's an acronym for?
It is not an acronym.
Oh,
I actually inherited it. It was the name when I came into the organization, and nobody has the reason for it. I apologize.
There you go. Okay, I wanted to know what the Z stood for myself.
It's kind of like Prince.
Okay. All right, enough of that. Members, the recommendation is approved to conform. Senator, did we vote on it?
Yeah, we had the motion in second.
Motion and second. Roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
Aye.
Always going to say aye, aye, aye. Okay.
Well, me?
Members, we now go to Control System 4.75, the statewide surcharge. Issue number 1 is the statewide surcharge. The recommendation is to approve. Department of Finance, if you could explain a little bit more.
Heather White, Department of Finance. This is to reimburse DGS for costs that are not really associated with departments specifically. Legislative offices in the Capitol, Capitol grounds maintenance, those types of things. And currently, the departments are being billed for this already. When this was first done back in 2006, the methodology was to use PWIs, and we are concerned that there have been a lot of movement in PWIs recently, and this would just be allow us to reallocate the surcharge this time.
Any other questions? Mr. Jeffries.
I think it would be appropriate in the future that we actually know what the $30 million is being spent on versus, I mean, I've got less than a paragraph here for a $30 million ticket and minimal explanation of what the $30 million actually goes to. It'd be nice to know that information.
Kristen Shelton, Department of Finance. Just by way of clarification, the $30 million is essentially allocated about $10 million or 1/3 of that to the state capitol. Another large chunk of that is for legislative printing for the bills that get printed. Those costs are not directly charged to anybody, so they're allocated out to all state agencies on a personnel year or position basis. The balance of the funds, about $10 million, is really for maintenance and security of the Capitol grounds. So the legislature doesn't support these costs in their budget. These are part of the Department of General Services budget. And then they turn around in turn, because the Capitol and these costs benefit the state broadly, allocate those costs to all departments on a proportionate share based on their positions that are authorized. Because there's been such significant changes in the number of positions authorized for state agencies, as well as other significant reductions, and then some increases that haven't kept pace with the way that we typically increase this budget, which is through the CPI or the price index. We are proposing to kind of relook at these numbers, rebase it, again allocating on a basis of positions or personnel years, and then distributing those costs among the state.
Who actually, I apologize for my ignorance here, but who actually oversees all these positions and who's hired and what positions they occupy?
This really isn't associated with positions. It's just a methodology that's used to allocate the cost. So the costs are for the maintenance of this building, the electricity that might be in this building, the printing of all of the bills that get introduced and modified as they go through the legislative process. So Department of General Services supports many of these activities. So they operate the Office of State Publishing, for instance. And because there's no real direct program or department that you can charge it to, we charge it across the board to all state agencies. And we use...
Who is it that decides...
The Department of General Services is tracking those costs from year to year. They are then allocated based on the original methodology. So, for instance, one department or agency had 1,000 positions back in 2005, 2006. Based on that, they had the proportional share of the total cost. Say today, because of reductions that might have occurred for their budget, they have only 750 positions. So they would get a smaller proportional share of those costs. It's essentially done kind of on a estimate at first, and then as those actual costs materialize, so the number of bills, the number of special session bills, the amount of labor that goes into maintaining the grounds of the Capitol, that type of thing, then they would go back and they would kind of readjust on a 2-year rolling forward basis. So some years they may over-collect, other years they under-collect. I would say by and large they've under-collected. And then it gets reallocated to each department. They get billed at the end of the fiscal year based on those cost estimates, and then we kind of relook at it every year.
And I'd add that for new positions to be authorized at the Department of General Services for these or other functions, that's your decision, the legislature. Right. So ultimately, the legislature decides what goes into these services. DGS doesn't really have fund sources of its own. It bills things, and this is just the way to allocate these particular very broad general services here at the Capitol to all of the state agencies that, in effect, benefit from them.
The amount is not changed. It's just how you proportion it?
There's two things that are occurring this year. So the surcharge has gradually increased every year since it was originally implemented in 2005, 2006. what we've done with departments is we haven't done anything to adjust or realign their budget. And so that's one piece. Then the other thing that's happening is because of a change in the way that the heating and cooling is introduced into the Capitol building. So the new central plant, which is a cap outlay project, came online. That had a significant impact in the costs that really didn't track to that consumer price index, where we've kind of had been incrementally growing department budgets based on what we call a price increase. And then, so there's partly we need to rebase it based on positions, and partly it's growing by a much greater rate, so we need to bump departments up because cost grew at a much greater rate than was anticipated, really because of the central plant coming online. And then the other increase has been the number of legislative packages that went forward, particularly driven from the extraordinary sessions. We had 8 extraordinary sessions, I believe, this last year. And so that really increased the amount of legislative printing that needed to be distributed out across all of those departments.
Now that you understand it a whole lot better, you
more than you ever wanted to know.
I get the effort to allocate it out. What's still not clear to me, and we'll have this conversation offline here, but it's not clear to me who decides the methodology of what is assigned over to other agencies and what the rationale or the criteria is to make those decisions. Somebody said it's the legislature. Well, who in the legislature, what committee, what group?
I think the legislature decides the number of positions for these services. I think ultimately it will be the administration under this proposal and under the existing that decides
the administration, as in the governor's administration.
Just to clarify, we're not making policy choices about the level of service that would generate these costs or the need for reimbursement to the Department of General Services. We're really just acknowledging that these costs exist, that they've grown disproportionate from what the price increase is, and we're trying to level and balance the way that it's distributed to the 200 plus or 200 state agencies that have to pay for a share of these costs. The methodology to do that was determined in 2005-2006 to do it on a personnel year basis. So if I'm a department and I have 100 positions, then I have a share based on those 100 positions of the total overall cost. If I'm a larger department with 2,000 positions, I'm going to have a larger share of those total costs. That decision was made in 2005-2006. What hasn't been done and what we're bringing before you today is really acknowledgement that there has been a lot of changes in the number of positions and that we haven't kept pace with that adjustment, and we really want to balance departments' budgets appropriately to let them be funded for their share of costs associated with these activities. And the amount of expenses, for instance, let's talk about state capital maintenance and repair. It's actually an item on the agenda a little further. If the legislature approves $5 million for state capital maintenance and repair, then we need to allocate a portion of that cost. If you deny that expense or that increase, then less would be allocated back out to the department. So the decision for all of these cost drivers rests with the legislature predominantly. How we allocate it is really what's before you today, and we're using a methodology that was adopted in 5-6. We just want to adjust it based on a big change in our state landscape and the number of positions that are out there to share these costs.
Mr. Cook?
This almost seems to be an argument to limit the number of bills we each carry, doesn't it? Not that I want to lead the witness or anything, but
that certainly would be your policy decision, and to the extent that you made that legislative choice, it would reduce future costs.
Okay. And
so we make those decisions, right, that establish the number of personnel, number of different offices, et cetera.
I thought it was Mr. Breeze that did that. Controls
right,
this.
All right, look. Did we move this one yet? Recommendation to approve the statewide surcharge. I really want to thank Mr. Jeffries for helping clarify all of this. Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Thank you.
Were we aware,
Mr.
Chair, were we aware that this would transfer the responsibilities over to the administration? Well, I thought
the
that's what
Department
you
of
said.
Finance actually administers the surcharge according to methodology that's effectively already been provided. The Department of Finance administers the surcharge just as it administers many thousands of things in the state budget. So this is just one of those, many, many items where there's a technical role for the Department of Finance.
It's been moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Furutani.
Yes.
Harambula. Brownlee.
Aye.
Cook.
Now I'm voting.
Jeffries.
Aye.
That's out. Item 1760, also Department of General Services, but this is another part of it. The Office of Public School Construction, Charter School Facilities Program. The recommendation is to reject this proposal. Is someone going to speak to it? Yes, Department of Finance. Let them start.
Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance. The governor's budget proposes to redirect 2 positions from the Real Estate Services Division of the Department of General Services to the Office of Public School Construction. With that, they would be funded $242,000 from Proposition 1D, K through 12 School Facilities Bond Act, and the Service Revolving Fund would be reduced by a like amount. So this is a fiscally neutral proposal, and it is redirected positions. It's not an augmentation, and these won't be creating new positions.
Any other comments?
Well,
The question was, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the opportunity to sit on the State Allocation Board with Mr. Harvey, who is contributes very, very much to our work on the State Allocation Board. And it's just my feeling at this particular point in time with the Charter School Facilities Program is that we are, pretty much running out of money. There's not a very big balance within that account. And agree with the chair's recommendation that I think that, at this point in time, even though this is being funded out of bond money as opposed to any other general fund, and that's an advantage, but I just do think that at this particular point in time that we don't need the positions because the balance on the account is so small.
And if we do get more revenue relative to school construction.
If we got new revenue for
committed.
schools construction, I would be supporting even additional people to move that work forward.
Okay, so the motion is to reject, recommendation is to reject. Any other questions? Motion, please. Ms. Brown, will you move it?
So moved.
And I will second. It's been moved, seconded. Roll call, please.
Furutani.
Yes.
Harambula. Brownlee.
Aye.
Cook.
No.
Jeffries.
No.
That's going to be open. Issue number 2, Office of Public School Instruction, Information Technology, requesting additional positions. The recommendation is to reject and basically saying work within the authorized positions to do this work. Same position. Any questions?
And again, on this one, I would just also comment that it's my understanding that the Office of School Construction currently has 5 IT staff that are intended to, that have been shifted over, I think, from DGS to look at new technology. And again, because of the depleting funds and a bond, at this point in time, I don't think it's, I agree with the Chair's recommendation.
Any other question, members? The motion to reject, Ms. Brownlee, you move
So
that?
moved, yeah.
And I will second. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Furutani.
Yes.
Harambula. Aye. Brownlee.
Aye.
Cook.
Aye.
Jeffries.
Aye.
Thank you. That's out. Members, we go to issue number 3, Division of the State Architect. This is provisional language. There's a lengthy recommendation. It's in reference to issues about looking at DSA and its performance. The recommendation is to approve the proposed budget provisional language in concept with the following amendments and narrow the flexibility provided by DSA add a performance audit of DSA by the Office of State Audits and Evaluations, and prohibit DSA from hiring further staff to monitor plan review workload and develop performance metrics for plan review workload until the audit is done, and then adopt the supplemental report language to establish interim minimum monthly reporting metrics for DSA until such time that the audit is complete and recommendations implemented. Whew, long recommendation. Questions? Does Scott have questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have questions on this. So, the Division of State Architect has traditionally been funded through continuous appropriations, and so this is about narrowing, I guess, that flexibility to DSA. And I'm just wondering, I'm just trying to understand, exactly what narrowing the flexibility really means. Is it who is going to, since it's not going to be continuous appropriations anymore, then who will make those appropriations when it is needed?
Adam or staff? Yes.
Kristen Shelton, Department of Finance. I think that the language that was introduced by the administration provided the needed flexibility to transition from an off-budget funding stream to an on-budget funding stream. And then based on further discussions with legislative staff, I think we refined that language and really don't have any significant issues. Essentially, the language as it stands now would allow for an increase to be authorized at the request of General Services upon approval by Finance of up to 10%. That would allow us to grow their budget by at least $5 million with just notification after the fact to the legislature. Secondly, it adds a provision that would allow us to further increase their budget should their workload increase with 30-day notification requirements. So we would notify the legislature and then that increase would occur. Should there be a long budget delay, there's language that's also included that essentially allows them to operate under their prior continuous authority. So should there be a delay, they would be able to continue business as usual as if they remained continuously appropriated. So we think that this language that's before you would strike a good balance between them being under the oversight of the legislature rather than just being continuously appropriated based on the concerns that had been previously raised in other hearings when you've talked about this issue. And we think that the OSA audit will shed some further light on the operations of DSA, the fee structures, and allow that program to operate in a much more efficient, transparent manner. Good news about that audit, because we've known that this was coming, we actually have an agreement that's been drafted. It's been signed by the Department of General Services. So the Office of State Audits and Evaluation is imminently ready to move forward with that audit and begin getting critical data.
Mr. Chair, can I just make a comment, though? It's just, the Division of State Architects, they're the ones that look over and review all these plans and so forth, and we're always working towards making sure that response time is an efficient one. Time is money in school construction. And, my concern is that, and people need to understand, too, that, this isn't general fund dollars. These are fees that districts are paying for this, for this particular service. So I just want to make sure that if we go through this process, that districts are served in an optimal way. I certainly support transparency in the process, but that they're being serviced in the most optimal capacity as possible, because it is indeed their funds that are supporting this effort.
Other questions, members? The issue that we're talking about has been around for a long, long time. There's been different audits done, apparently. Some questions have come up. I think also gives an opportunity for the state architect to point maybe at the districts, because a lot of problems start there relative to the kind of plans that they forward to DSA relative to get okayed. So the issue of bin time and other things that come up, I think will serve both the department and the districts well with the audit and take a good look at it.
And I am totally supportive of the audit. I just, my only area of concern is that if the Department of Finance is going to be making the allocations back and moving away from this continuous appropriations model, that we make sure that the appropriate funds are getting there in order to that plans can be expedited on a timely basis.
Got it. That's important. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Mr. Rankin.
Mr. Chairman, if it's appropriate, I'd move approval of the recommendation because I think this will help address some longstanding complaints about the speed with which the approval process is occurring.
Thank you, Mr. Ramey. This has been moved. Can I get a second? Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
Aye.
Thank you, members. We now go to issue number 4, capital repairs funding. Another lengthy staff recommendation to reject the governor's request to transfer the cost of repairs to the legislature, but sustain the $5.4 billion general fund reduction, million general fund reduction to the DGS budget in 2010-11. Additionally, approve the revision of $2 million in additional general fund in 2010 and 11, and approve the budget bill language regarding Joint Rules Committee approval of capital repair.
Is it too late to get the billion?
Questions? I'm sure that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Nobody?
I would move approval of the staff recommendation.
Thank you. And I will second. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula?
Aye.
Brownlee? Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
Aye.
Members, we now go to control section 2430. Issue number 1 is State School Building Aid Fund. To require the Department of Finance to review the ability of funds formed, what? Department of Finance. Thank you.
Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance. Control Section 24.30 authorizes the transfer of sale and lease revenue from the sale and lease of state relocatable classrooms. We've identified $10 million that's available for transfer to the general fund for general fund relief.
Questions, members? Can we get a motion to require the Department of Finance to review the availability of funds that come from this fund and report back next year?
So moved.
Second. Roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
Aye.
Thank you. Members, we now go to item 2240, Department of Housing and Community Development, issue number 1, infill incentive grant funding availability. We've heard this 2 times before. We'll go straight to the motion.
Move approval.
Staff recommendations to approve 60% of the funding for Cal reuse and 40% of the funding for the existing 2G projects. We have a motion. I second it. Roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook? Jeffries?
No.
That will be open. Thank you. We now go to item 8885, Commission on State Mandates. Issue number 1, April Finance Letter, In-Home Supportive Services. This mandate, the recommendation is to approve the $475,000 general fund augmentation and do not suspend this mandate. Good afternoon.
This is sort of the finance proposal.
Does the Department of Finance want to comment on this proposal?
Lorena Romero, Department of Finance. Our proposal is to fund the IHSS mandate for the 475 and continue that funding for the mandate.
So the recommendation is to continue the mandate and to approve the funding. Motion, please. Yes,
question?
of course.
Question. One of the justifications for not suspending the mandate is that the advisory commissions could be helpful in implementing program cuts that were included in the governor's budget. What if those cuts don't happen? Is there then a justification for continuing with the mandate and not suspending it as we're doing with other mandates? I guess what I'm saying, maybe it would, maybe keeping the mandate could be contingent on if there are no cuts, then maybe there isn't as much need for a mandate.
Yeah. Apparently, Mr. Arambula, in discussion with Sub 1, which handles this, the health issues, that they felt that this mandate still helps in terms of dealing with this issue. So,
okay, and then just a clarification. This is an augmentation above and beyond what's been appropriated in previous years, and if so, what is the rationale for the augmentation?
yes, please. Adam, go ahead.
It's an augmentation above the January governor's budget. This funding wasn't in the original January proposal. It's a May revised request. So the augmentation is above what's in the governor's request, not necessarily compared to previous years. I don't have those numbers. I don't know if finance.
Marian O'Malley, Ledge Analyst Office. This is a newly identified mandate, so there's been no funding for this mandate in prior years. The $475,000 is associated with prior year cost, so it's actually kind of a separable issue. You could pay the prior year cost and suspend or repeal the mandate going on in the future. Your question regarding the advisory committees can be helpful in giving advice to the County Board of Supervisors regarding in-home supportive services. Our office's perspective on it is that there's really no need to mandate the particular forum for local discussions regarding the IHSS program, and so that these responsibilities could be assigned to the county boards of SUPS.
One final question. What was the Senate action on this item?
Jeff Carasone, Department of Finance. This action that's included in the staff recommendation would conform to the Senate action, which would be to approve the April finance letter and the $475,000.
Okay. Thank you.
May I get a motion for approval then?
I will reluctantly move approval. Because I just don't like mandates, Mr. Chairman, and wherever possible, I would just as soon eliminate them on site.
Gotcha. Thank you for that motion. I will second. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
No.
Jeffries?
Issue number 2, members. Mandate redetermination process. Approve the placeholder trailer bill language. Does anybody have that language?
Yes, it's been provided.
Okay. That's an attachment to the agenda. Any questions, members? Looks like we have speakers, too. Do we have comments from the audience? Yes, please, come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Brown with the California School Boards Association, and we obviously were the plaintiffs in the case that is before you in terms of the redetermination. And we have at least one specific concern with the language, which is that it doesn't establish a threshold for redetermination. I believe it just says that there would be a subsequent change in law, and so we think that there needs to be a threshold threshold provisions in there that would deal with it, so that some a technical change in law, merely a comma or a change in wording, didn't automatically call for a redetermination. And so we think that the language needs some more vetting with local stakeholders and to see if we can work through what some of those issues are to make sure that it does comply with what the court has decided on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, welcome.
Mr. Chair, members, Jean Hurst on behalf of the California State Association of Counties. I think we'd concur with CSBA. Obviously, we've been discussing the proposal, and I think we share their concerns. We just want to make sure that we don't end up back in court on this one. So, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members, Dan Carrig on behalf of the League of California Cities obviously concur with the prior remarks. This case that is being discussed here was a very important case for local governments on mandates, and we just want to make sure whatever the additional language that's adopted doesn't sort of erode the effect of that court decision. So, thank you.
We are just dealing with placeholder language right now, so we will continue the discussions with concerned organizations and individuals. And that's the recommendation to approve the placeholder budget trailer bill language.
With that clarification, I'd move approval.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Second. Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
I'm going to stay off.
Thank you. Issue number 3, mandate reimbursement process 1 and 2. Recommendation, approve 1-year suspension and adopt budget bill language to require a report with recommendations by January 10th, 2011. So here you go, Mr. Rambula. Got one. Questions, members? Motion? Second. Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
Off.
Thank you. That's out. Members, we are now go to issue number 4, which is about open meetings, the Brown Act. Recommendation is to reject the governor's proposal. Questions, comments? Yes, sir, Mr. Jeffries.
I want to clarify it.
We have somebody from the newspaper.
This our action will allow the Brown Act to be suspended. Is that correct?
No.
Or is it the Brown Act will stay in place?
Yes, sir.
And we will reimburse for the mandate costs.
Yes.
Very good.
Department of Finance, Lorena Romero. We would just like to state that we continue to support the governor's budget, this item. And if the legislature would consider or choose to conform to the Senate action, we would have no significant concerns of that.
Thank you. What does the Senate do? What did the Senate do?
The Senate adopted an approach that our office recommended regarding a certain provision of the Brown Act. It's important to know that the Brown Act mandate isn't the entirety of the Brown Act. It is simply certain procedures within the Brown Act, the posting of the agenda 3 days before, for example. And our office proposed an alternative way of carrying out the spirit of the Brown Act, but revising that particular requirement.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members, my name is Tom Newton, California Newspaper Publishers Association. This issue has been before the legislature probably a half a dozen times since CNPA sponsored the amendment to the modern agenda posting provision of the Act. CNPA is also the sponsor of Prop 59, which is part of the suggestion from the LAO that would create a best practices while suspending the mandate. We support the recommendation of the committee and hope that it carries it out in a moment to maintain the Brown Act, even though we have argued until we're blue in the face the idea that posting an agenda to a bulletin board in a public place three days before they have a meeting doesn't impose any significant costs that need to be reimbursed. We lost that fight in the Commission of State Mandates a long time ago, but if it's ever reconsidered, we'd like another shot at it. But until that time, we wholeheartedly agree with the recommendation to maintain the Brown Act intact. Thank you very much.
Other questions, members?
Just so I understand the Senate action, this was an action that was the result of a recommendation from the LAO's office?
That's correct.
And could you elaborate a little bit on what their action entails?
Certainly. Just again, by way of background, most of the Brown Act long preceded mandate law. So most of the Brown Act does not impose a state reimbursable mandate. The particular elements of this mandate that are reimbursable are the posting of the agenda 3 days before and the preparation of the agenda, and also coming back after a closed session and disclosing the actions that you're taking in executive session. Collectively, local governments request reimbursement of about $20 million a year from the state for those activities. And what our office has recommended is that you clarify that the posting of the agenda 3 days before is essentially a best practice, a way of complying with Proposition 59. However, a local government could comply with Proposition 59 in an alternative way, but they would need to announce at a regularly scheduled public hearing how they're going to comply with Prop 59, how they're going to give life to the Brown Act. And they would need to adhere to that process, and provided that they did that, that could be considered an alternative way of complying with the Brown Act provisions. That alternative, that they could come up with some other way of complying with Proposition 59, would not result in a reimbursable mandate, and therefore the state could save about $20 million a year.
Mr. Chairman, if appropriate, I would move that we take action to conform to the Senate's action.
If we do this, it'll go to conference committee the way it is, Juan, and they could work it out there.
I know, but $20 million sounds awfully good.
Do we accept that as a new motion, or is that how we would do it?
Yeah.
Alternate motion?
Yes, for a second. If he goes, yeah, if there's a second.
Yes, Mr. Cook.
I was just curious whether the League of California Cities had a position on this, since
I think they're here.
I know they are. That's why I'm putting them on the spot. Sorry, Dan.
Well, thank you. Again, Dan Carrig on behalf of the League of California Cities. We were, as an organization, before my time, were involved actually in the development of the Brown Act, and I know supported it. So in that vein, we've supported the policies that underlie the Brown Act. To Mr. Arambulis' point earlier, we don't like mandates. It's a very frustrating process. The trying to get your money back out of the state has also been very frustrating. So, but you know, we have supported the law. And we're not here asking for the law to be suspended. And so if the legislature decided to continue that, we obviously would have no objection with that.
Yes, sir. Of course.
Sorry, Tom Newton again, California Newspaper Publishers Association. The real problem with suspending the mandate is that while the law requires an agenda to be posted, it also requires that local agencies stick to the agenda and they don't take surprise action. That's the heart of the Brown Act, that there's notice about an open and public meeting and that they don't take surprise action. What happens is if you go to a best practices format, what we fear is that they will have a best practice and then a worst practice when political pressure comes up. And then what you lose is the enforceability of the agenda posting requirement. And so it really becomes optional. Now, what we'd like to do is explore with the LAO alternatives to this. And if Prop 59, which is the Constitutional Sunshine Amendment, is effective as an enforcer of the Brown Act, then that would just be terrific to us. But we don't see it there yet. We think that there might need to be language developed that would allow people to have an enforceable right when agencies fell below the line and put out an agenda, for example, that said they were going to do this, this, and this, but then they did something else. That's what the Brown Act currently prohibits. And this, we think, would threaten the ability of the public to enforce the provisions of the law.
If I may, the provision, the requirement that a local government can only act on items that are part of the agenda, that's not a reimbursable mandate. That's a provision that would not be affected in any way by the LAO proposal.
If they don't have to post them,
Because that's simply a prohibition on that's a prohibition on local government agency action on things that are not not on the agenda. So that prohibition does not constitute a state reimbursable mandate. The provisions of the Brown Act that constitute a state reimbursable mandate are the preparation of the agenda and the posting of the agenda, the coming back after the executive session to announce the actions that you've taken, and the training of the public officials as to how to carry out those provisions of the law. The prohibition about acting on items that are not on the agenda, that's not a reimbursable mandate.
But I would argue that the posting of the agenda is probably the single most important aspect for the public to monitor what their government is proposing to do and what action they're proposing to take. If we relax the standard, and unfortunately this isn't a fiscal debate, this is a policy debate, and if we relax the standard to where a local agency can adopt whatever standard they deem best practice, their standard may simply be that the secretary has it prepared and sitting on her desk, and that it doesn't have to be posted outside or in plain public view. I mean, aren't we giving them significant flexibility to adopt whatever standard they deem appropriate?
I think the requirements of Proposition 59 are pretty strong. And so for a local government to say we're not going to post an agenda or we're only going to be posting it 5 minutes before the hearing, you wouldn't even be in compliance with Proposition 59. So we would direct local governments to develop a policy that's in concert with the voters' wishes with Prop 59. They could use the particular Open Meeting Act requirements that have been passed before as guidelines, or they can do something else, but they need to announce it annually at a public hearing what their policies are going to be to comply with the spirit of the Open Meeting Act.
To take that to its extreme, 58 counties, 500 some cities,
Many
2,000 or
special
3,000
districts.
special districts, you would have that many different policies, and for a citizen to try and understand what the policy is would be a little challenging to have that many different policies on how you post, when you post, where you post. I mean, again, these are back to policy debates, not fiscal. So I think this is a very, very slippery slope for us to venture down. I think democracy and transparency is a messy business and potentially an expensive business, but I think it's one that we owe to the taxpayers across the state, that they have open and transparent government and know how to access it and see how it's going to work. And this may be one of those expenses that is required to have an open and transparent government at all levels. So,
members, if I could suggest that if we go with the recommendation before us, although we have a motion on the floor, it makes sure it goes to conference committee where we can hammer out a lot of these things if there's other concerns. But Pete, did you want to say something?
Yes, sir. I could not agree more with Assemblyman Jeffries. I have numerous clients who have had actions before local boards, and we've had to fight to get them to post the agendas. I mean, the posting of the agenda and the time in which they do it is of prime importance to keep an eye on local government and especially special districts.
Members, we have a motion on the floor.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I will withdraw my motion if our Republican colleagues will move the expenditure of $20 million for posting and preparation of the agendas.
is the $20 million not proposed to be expended as drafted in the current?
Well, I believe the staff recommendation is to reject the governor's proposal, which is the governor's proposal is to suspend that mandate. So an action to reject would require the expenditure of $20 million.
So the original motion stands, right?
Yes, if someone moves it from the left side of the infield.
Right side of the infield.
Right side, I'm sorry.
Careful.
The right side of the infield.
Are you done? Yes. Okay. I would move that we reject the governor's proposal and that we maintain the Brown Act as currently adopted.
Second. Mandate. We have a motion that's been moved and seconded.
Boy, that's
by the right side of the infield. Roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee, Cook,
Aye.
Jeffries.
Aye.
Very good. Thank you very much, members. And thank you for the great discussion. We go to issue number 5, members. This is the handicapped and disabled student 1 and 2 and seriously emotionally disabled student mandate AB 3632. Staff recommendation is to reject the governor's proposed suspension and adopt budget bill language to require a report with recommendations by January 10th, 2011.
Department of Finance, Lorena Romero.
Yes, please.
We continue to support the governor's proposal for the suspension of the mandate.
Thank you. Public comment? Yes, public comment. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Jean Hurst on behalf of the California State Association of Counties here, expressing our grave concerns about the suspension of the AB 3632 mandate. I just want to make clear, I think this mandate in particular is not a particularly good candidate for suspension. One, given the kinds of services that we're providing, federally required services to special ed students. Our system to provide these services has been in place since 1984. From a practical perspective, it'd be very difficult for us to maintain funding for this program for a year, to continue it whenever you guys decide to go ahead and reinstate the mandate, or we would have to completely dismantle the program for a year, and to restart it would be extremely difficult. We don't think this is a particularly good candidate for suspension. Frankly, we think the best options are either to fully fund it or to repeal the mandate altogether.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? The motion is to reject the governor's proposed suspension and in the budget bill language require a report to look at the effectiveness and then come back with a recommendation January 10th, 2011. May I get a motion, please? I'll move it. Wait a minute. Where's...
You can move it.
I'll give a courtesy second.
Okay, I move it. Get a courtesy second. Roll call, please.
Under discussion, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sure.
I will say this, and then I will support the motion. But it bothers me greatly when we are, as a state, are required to pay for obligations that are subsequently required by other actions, whether it's a state proposition or, in this case, by federal law. So, in effect, we're paying for something that is already required, whether the state requires it or not. So, again, I just point out it's $133 million. I would just as soon repeal the mandate. It's going to be required anyway by federal law. Federal law doesn't reimburse schools anywhere near what the true cost is, and that's a separate issue. For us to backfill the government to the tune of $133 million doesn't make a lot of sense. But having said that, I will support the motion because I understand that's the direction that this committee wishes to go in.
Also, if we do pass this out of the committee, because the conference committee, we can look at the issue of effectiveness. I really appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Arambula, in terms of the concerns, but also in terms of the students that we're going to service with this. It's really a special group that we want to make sure has the services. We're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place on this one. Mr. Cook, comment? Question?
Yeah, this is a tough one. By the way, I call the chair's attention to a paper that was written by a brilliant graduate student a number of years ago for his master's on unfunded mandates. If anyone wants to read it, it's a cure for insomnia. I actually learned more about unfunded mandates, particularly at the federal level. But this is something I think the whole issue of it, if we talk about reform in government, is something in the future that I think we've got to sooner or later bite the bullet on this, because somebody's, always going to get hurt in terms of where the price is on this. So this one is a very, very sticky one, but the whole issue, I think, is we've got to review the rules and everything else, because a lot of people don't even understand them, and sometimes they're just not fair.
I agree with you, Paul. I think we need to take a look at all this mandates, a pretty broad net that we cast with these things. So
I think I have 200 copies of that paper if you're interested.
a young graduate student's named Paul Cook. It wasn't even young.
Mr. Chair, if I
Yes,
could
ma'am.
provide a little bit more information. This mandate is funded under the Department of Mental Health budget, which was an issue in the subcommittee today. We do not know what the results of that subcommittee hearing for this issue was. They suspended the $52 million in their budget, therefore requiring for us to put this mandate in our suspended list to notify locals of the suspension. If there is funding continued in that budget, and some of the other budgets, which include some type of funding for this mandate, is under special education also. So there are some amounts, other sources in other budgets which will fund also this mandate. However, because the DMH budget suspended it, we were required to put this under our suspended list so that we can provide notification to the local agencies. If we are required to fund this, then it would be to the tune of $133 million.
From what we understand, Sub 1 and Sub 2 are looking at the issue and have asked us to go with this recommendation. But again, if we pass a recommendation, it goes to conference committee, we can hammer some of these things out there. So the recommendation is to reject the governor's proposal of suspension and adopt budget bill language to require a report. Can I get a motion, please? I moved already. And then was seconded by Mr. Yes, roll call.
Bertani?
Yes.
Arambula?
Again, a reluctant no. I mean a yes.
Brownlee? Cook?
Not voting.
Jeffries?
We hold it open. Thank you, members. We now go to the California Department of Veteran Affairs. Issue number 1, Operation Welcome Home, funding for CVSOs and SAIS. County Veteran Service Offices. And the Subvention Administration Information Systems. Long recommendation, adopt the governor's May revised proposal to allocate $768,000 from the VSOF is?
Veteran Service Officer Fund.
Thank you. For the Subvention Administration Information System, an $8.4 million general fund for the local assistance placeholder budget bill language to instruct the CDVA to report to the Joint Legislative Budget Committee and placeholder supplemental reporting language. Welcome. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Well, the subvention proposal is to establish a database that all counties will be using when they process veterans' claims, so we can actually track what they're doing, see the type of claims that are being filed, their success rate. It's information that we don't have now about the troops that are coming back and just veterans in general that are filing claims. Nobody has a common database in the country, but we'll be the first state to have that. This money comes out of a fund that is generated revenue through license plate sales, so it's no expense to the general fund, something we've been trying to do for a long time, and it'll put all the counties all speaking the same language, and will give us the type of data that we need to report to you on how our veterans are being treated in this state.
And you support the recommendation?
Yes, sir.
Any other comments? Department of Finance, LAO, questions, members?
No, I just wanted to make we had a rather extensive hearing with Assemblymember Perez. I co-chaired on that. We had it was very, very informational. Very detailed on the information that we obtained, and just the importance of this. The fact that from a fiscal standpoint, the amount of money that we lose in terms of benefits because the veterans don't understand what they're entitled to, and we're talking about all kinds of programs, from educational ones, people that are veterans that are homeless. It goes on and on and on. And sometimes you just look at it, you don't take those ancillary costs into effect, but strongly support this, because I think in the long run, in effect, we're going to save the state some money, and the return on this will be tremendous.
If that is a motion, I will second it.
Move the second in.
Second.
And we have no comment. We're fine. Mr. Pete's read the tea leaves. He knows what's going on. Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Furutani?
Yes.
Arambula? Brownlee? Cook?
Aye.
Jeffries?
Aye.
Thank you, members. That's out. Issue number 2 is Pathways Home Program Grant.
Mr.
We'll hear from the director, I believe, is here. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Fred Gussman, and I'll try to be brief. Just a quick overview of the Pathway Program, and I was hoping that I could have 2 of the graduates speak to you just briefly. The Pathway Program is a residential treatment program developed for the purposes of serving these new warriors. It's a one of its kind. It's the only one that actually has been designed for serving those who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Also, it's the only one probably in the United States right now that is licensed by a state agencies, the State Department of Social Services, for providing the area where they reside, and also from the Department of Mental Health for treating post-traumatic stress disorder. We've had over 170, working our way towards 200 folks that have been through that program, 80 families. We have active duty reserve, National Guard, and recently discharged veterans there. We opened up in 2008 as a nonprofit through an anonymous donor who provided money for the initial 3 years. We provide state-of-the-art assessment. We actually almost surpassed the federal system in that. And just recently, we were able to get a grant on a research project that excited Washington, D.C. when I was there last week, the Department of Defense and actually the Department of Veterans Affairs, in coming up with a potential prevention and intervention for those who've been treated but then leave their treatment settings, whether it's a hospital or outpatient. It's one of the big cost factors, if you will, not only to healthcare systems, but to state and community agencies such as police, fire, and so on, and Department of Social Service, is that when these young warriors return, even though they might be in treatment and succeed somewhat, they are going to be exposed to new stressors, new events, and this becomes very costly, if you will. Just recently, we've been working with the Napa Police Department, the Highway Patrol, the Sheriff's Department, and Napa Community College, all pulling together to find ways to improve and integrate more of a broader treatment approach as opposed to traditional mental health services.
Would you like your...
yes, I would.
If they can make brief statements?
Yes, we could.
Gentlemen? Thank you for coming down. We greatly appreciate your service. If you could be brief relative to this program, because we're going to fund it here. And
thank you, gentlemen.
Welcome.
First off, please excuse me. I'm not much of a public speaker. My name is Mark Jolly. I have 18 years of active service. with 4 combat deployments, was decorated twice for valor. When I came back home from my last tour in Iraq, my life literally fell apart. I'll spare you the details other than saying that after waking everyone in the house, yelling, help me, I have wounded up here, dragging the treadmill down the stairs, my family asked me to leave. A couple of days later, my unit threw me in the back of a vehicle, took me to the emergency room to have me admitted for mental health services. The Army, unfortunately, didn't have the room for me. I ended up calling the Army suicide hotline and was connected to a fax machine. After that, through chance, I found the pathway home. Well, actually, my unit found the pathway home. The program is so unique. I have been through every program. No disrespect to the VA or the military, I've been through them all. The Pathway program is so unique and gives you all the tools that you need to cope with the stressors that you have to deal with when coming back from a combat deployment. Again, I'm going to make this brief. I could go on for quite a while. If it were not for the Pathway program, I would not be here right now. I'm convinced of that. If I were here, if I did make it through, I guarantee you that I would be a burden on society. You would be paying for me to be in prison. So one of those two. But the Pathway program is so unique, and I've been through them all. And gentlemen, kind ladies, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony and for your service.
Thank you for your service.
Yes, sir.
Assembly, good afternoon. Going off of what the VA said earlier, I got out in probably about 2005, and I muddled my way through an overloaded VA system that were not ready for the Iraqi veterans and the lingering effects we had from the war. I've muddled through that system for 4 years. Similar to Mark, I've had my ups and downs, and I've had my travails. I needed to go to the Pathway home 4 years ago, not 4 years now, not 4 years later, as it were. No blame against the VA system, but of course it's part of bureaucracy, and being able to get the individual trauma and therapy is a lot different than getting an appointment every 3 months or 4 months with the VA system. That could take years. So I'd just like to say that it's provided me valuable time, facility, and resources to actually recuperate my life and move towards a semblance of what my life once was. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony and your service. Members, the recommendation is to adopt the governor's May revised proposal to provisionally make available up to $1.3 million general fund for support of the Pathway program home. This action would also adopt a provisional language presented in the May revise. That language says that it would make available up to $1.3 million general fund dollars in a non-competitive grant for support of the Pathways Home program in the event that alternative funding for the program cannot be identified. So that's the recommendation. The testimony is very eloquent and clear. Can we get a motion, please?
I would defer to Colonel Cook.
Moved by Mr. Cook, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Rambula. Moved and seconded. Motion, roll call, please.
Bertani,
Yes.
Arambula, Brownlee, Cook,
Yes.
Jeffries.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That's out of here. Appreciate it very much.
Chairman and members.
Members, we're going to finish up those items that are left open. Thank you very much for being here today. We have a pretty lengthy meeting tomorrow, but that's the last one, and some very interesting issues tomorrow. So if I could get some help with votes that were missed. Thank you very much, Mr. Jeffries. Appreciate it. Adam, are you going to take care of this?
Yeah, I'll run through them. Starting with the consent calendar, current vote 4-0, Brownlee. Legal Services Fund Swap, current vote 4-0, Brownlee. Sorry. Under the vote-only calendar, Department of Justice 0820, issue number 1.
Reject the proposal.
Brownlee, aye. Under vote only, Department of Justice, issue number 2, gun show program augmentation.
Motion was to approve.
For approval, current vote 2-1. Chair voting aye. Brownlee. On Department of Veterans Affairs, issue number 1, current vote 3-0. Brownlee. Under items to be heard, I think, no, is this still vote only? Oh, this is backwards. My apologies. This is vote only, Employment Development Department, 7100, issue number 1. It was ahead of those two. Our pages got reversed. My apologies. Current vote is 4-0. Brownlee, aye. Employment Development Department, issue number 2. Current vote 4-0. Brownlee. Brownlee, aye. Department of Industrial Relations, still under vote only, page 8, federal grant. Current vote 2-2, chair voting aye. Brownlee, aye. Department of Industrial Relations, still vote only, issue number 2. Current vote 3-0, chair voting aye. Brownlee, aye. What is this? For vote only, Department of Veterans Affairs, issue number 2, Reading and Fresno Veteran Homes, phase 2. Current vote 3-0. Brownlee. Brownlee, aye. Under California Emergency Management Agency 0690, issue number 1, Domestic Violence Shelter Funding, current vote 4-0. Brownlee. Under items to be heard, the Board of Equalization 0860, issue 1, Collection Costs, current vote 2-2. Chair voting aye. Brownlee. Aye. Under 9650, CalPERS, issue 1, current vote 2-0. Chair voting aye. Brownlee. Control section 3.60, Judges Retirement System 2 rate, current vote 3-0. Chair voting aye. Brownlee. Trailer Bill Language, Public Works Board, current vote 4-0. Brownlee. Jumps down to Department of General Services, issue number 1, Office of Planning School Construction, current vote 2-2. Arambula. Aye. I think that's all I have for you, sir. Down to Department of General Services capital outlay, capital repair costs, current vote 4-0. Brownlee. Control section 24.30, State School Building Aid Fund. Recommendation was to have Department of Finance look into availability of these funds for next year. Current vote 4-0. Brownlee. Department of Housing and Community Development, issue 1, Infill Incentive Grant Funding Availability. Motion to approve 60% for the Cal Reuse Program, 40% for existing infill incentive grants. Current vote 2-1. Brownlee. Aye. Cook?
No.
No. And I believe that's all I have for him. Okay. Mandates. Issue 1, In-Home Supportive Services Mandate. Motion was to approve the May revise. Current vote 2-2. Chair voting aye. Brownlee. Mandates issue number 2, redetermination and approval of placeholder trailer bill language to continue working on the details. Current vote 3-0. Brownlee. Mandates issue 3, the mandate reimbursement process 1 and 2. Motion was a 1-year suspension with reporting requirements. Current vote 3-0. Brownlee. Mandates issue number 4, the Open Meeting and Brown Act. Motion was to reject the suspension of the mandate. Current vote 3-1. Chair voting aye. Brownlee. Brownlee, aye. Mandates issue 5. Current motion was to reject the suspension of the mandate and include reporting language. Current vote 2-0. Chair voting aye. Brownlee. Oh, this is one vote. Department of Veterans Affairs issue number 1, funding for CVSOs and SAIS. Current vote for both of those is 4-0. Brownlee. Aye. And Department of, oh, never mind, you voted on that.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.